Hey guys, what's up? So since physical therapy school is just right around the corner starting next month with some of you guys watching, I'd like to go over a breakdown, class by class, brief breakdown of how each class went for me in my first trimester of physical therapy school. So here I actually have my unofficial transcript that I'm going to go over. I'm going to highlight the class that I'm talking about, give you my opinion of how the class went, and what some things you can what I went through, which maybe you possibly could expect at your school. And I'll also tell you the grade that I actually ended up coming out with. So I hope this gives you insight of what to expect in your first trimester of physical therapy school. So with that being said, let's get started. So the first class that I'm going to talk about is medical terminology. And so I took medical terminology when I was in undergraduate school, and that was an online course and it was really easy actually. So medical terminology in physical therapy school was in class, and we definitely rushed through a bunch of medical terminology terms. It was based on systems. So first we went over general medical terminology, and then we went over medical terminology related to musculoskeletal, then neurological, then integumentary, then cardiopulmonary. And it was definitely a fast-paced class, but for me, since I already had a kinesiology background in my undergraduate school, it was fairly easy for me. But I would imagine that, for example, my friend, he was actually a math teacher who got into PT school. So when he had that class, he actually said it was quite difficult for him. So medical terminology will depend on your background of what classes you took in undergraduate. For the exams, they were a bit harder than the online exams because the online exams were online and then these ones were in person. And then how it would work was that we would have to, there wouldn't be a word bank, so we would have to fill in the sentence, for example, with words that should have come straight to our minds. And I recall that I actually did get a 73% on one of the exams, and there were 3 exams total. And so I was actually called in, and my professor who was teaching that class asked if everything was okay. So I consider it an easy class, but you do have to study for it, of course. And the grade that I came out with in that class was it was a pass or fail course, so not much pressure compared to actual graded course. It was a pass or fail course, so, and I passed. The next class I'm going to talk about is clinical imaging, and this is related to radiology. And this class was actually on the more difficult side, so this class was only 1 hour, I think, a week, if I recall correctly. And how it worked was that we would go through radiology scans and learning how to read them through each body part at a time. And so you had to learn how to read radiographs and how to identify certain structures. I think that was simply because my professor writes quite difficult questions that the class was hard. But I wouldn't expect it for you in other schools that it wouldn't be too hard. If you study for it, you'll do just fine. And what I came out with was a 86% in the class. The next class I'm going to talk about is patient management and communication. I'm not sure if you're going to have this class in other schools. I'm not sure if it's only specific to my school that we have this class, but it was a class about how to interact with patients, and it introduced the documentation portion of physical therapy jobs and the certain sections of it. This class was when I actually did my first interview with a pretend patient, and it was actually in a group interview. So I was paired up with 4 other individuals and we did a group interview. There weren't any exams for this class. There were a lot of assignments though. It was an easy class overall. Just attend it, listen to the material. There wasn't much studying for it. And what I came out for this class was a 93% in the class. So the next class I'm going to talk about now is pathology. Pathology was a class that you had to study for. How it would work was that it was based on classification of diseases. So there were musculoskeletal diseases and disorders, there was autoimmune disorders, there was gastrointestinal diseases, and then bone diseases. And so it was categorized. I think this class was twice a week, 2.5 hours long. And so there was a lot of lecture time, no lab component. How my teacher did his exams was that he would basically ask you to name 5 respiratory diseases and describe them. And so it was a lot of, you actually had to know the diseases and such, and you had to describe them. So it showed to him that you actually knew the diseases and disorders. So I thought it was a good way to test students, and I think it was an appropriate way to test students, especially in pathology class, since there were so many diseases and disorders that we had to learn. And what I came out with in this course was an A, a flat 90. So I had 5 classes total that first trimester, and it's probably the second most studied for class that I had that trimester. So last but not least, I'm sure this is the class that every single person takes in their first year of physical therapy school, no matter what school you go to, and that's undergraduate anatomy and physiology on steroids. Anatomy was really hard, and it was a lot of material, so much material. If you think they covered everything in undergraduate anatomy, think again, because there's a lot more anatomy that was introduced in this course. When I was taking this anatomy class, there was a lot of information that I remember learning back in undergraduate school, but then there's just so much brand new information that they were throwing at us, and it was the #1 priority that I had to study for in my first trimester of school. The exams were all multiple choice, and they were very difficult. I think I got a C in one exam, I got a D in another exam, then I got 2 Bs in other exam, the next 2 exams. And how it would work was that my professor, he would get the questions that was most missed from one exam and carry those questions over to the next exam. He would give those questions to us, so at least we knew some of the questions that would be in the exam, and he would also reword it slightly so it wasn't the same exact question, but previous materials from one exam would go over to the next exam. And so if the class missed a lot of questions, then a lot of those questions from the previous exam move on to the next exam. So it was a cumulative every time when I was studying for anatomy. So there was a lecture component and a lab component. It was twice, I think it was 3 times a week. No, it was twice a week actually. And the exams were taken on the laptop and they were multiple choice. Lab was twice a week as well. And it was around, I think, 3 to 4 hours long. And it's basically every lab session you would just learn how to identify nerves, muscles, arteries, veins. And it was just basically an identification process. And I don't make it to sound as easy as it sounds, because it definitely was not. There's a lot of anatomy, of course, as you know, and so identifying all these structures and nerves, which are all jumbled together, it was hard. And how the practicals work was that the lab instructors would set up all the cadavers around the room, and they would tag with strings and needles certain parts, and there would also be models, like models of bones, models of muscles, and they would lay those down as well. And I think there were about 40 stations set up around the cadaver room, and so our lab group would each be assigned to a station to start at, and there would be a time going projected overhead, and every minute and 30 seconds the bell would ring and we would rotate from one station to the next station. So you had a minute 30 to identify whatever structure it was, and after one full round they would then do a speed round where they would set the timer to 30 seconds, and so you would have 30 seconds to review or make any second guesses of what you think the structure is. And that was hard too. And what I ended up with anatomy was, oh, I actually almost got an A in anatomy, I didn't even know. So what I came out with was at 89%. And so those are the 5 classes I took in my first trimester of PT school. I hope that this helps give you insight of what to expect in your first trimester of PT school. Thanks for watching, guys. If you can, please like this video and subscribe to it. I need my first subscriber actually. And I hope this video helped you. If you have any comments or questions, leave them below, and perhaps in the next video I'll even answer them myself in an actual video. So thanks guys, and see you again. Peace.